sort of laying a foundation for.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. Laying a foundation for how I want to use all the various tools to help us have these vital conversations. And there were a lot of questions, but I think generally well received as a concept. And so now, as we go into 2014, I've got a number already of community conversations scheduled and planned for the next couple of months. Haven't done one of them yet, but am expecting them to yield some good things. I've also put together an innovation space, selected 10 of my staff members to participate in that each month over the next year. And the first one of those will be coming up next week. And I'm also planning to work with staff to start having more of the aspirations exercises with community members as well. So I've been very excited about the possibilities and want to use these tools to help us, and have written them into my strategic action plan, which my board has approved or will approve next week for 2014. So that's what I've been busy with as far as Harwood is, as far as Harwood goes. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Questions for David? Thoughts?
How about an attaboy for David?
Yeah.
Indeed. I was telling him that earlier. But are there any ideas or thoughts or questions you have of him?
This is David from Lansing. I have a question. David, how did you get that into your plan? I'm just curious about how that looks.
I'd be happy once it's adopted by my board next week. I'd be happy to send it. Basically, I have my own. The library has a strategic action plan for 2014, and then I have an action plan prepared to both accompany that and to sort of elaborate on my own activities for the year. And I've got that plan divided into three basic sections. Let me just pull this up here. It is the first category is community engagement, the second is learning, third is organizational effectiveness. It's especially in the community engagement part where I talk a lot about the need to gain and use public knowledge and using some of the Harwood practice there. And in the learning part, the use of innovation spaces with staff and aspirations exercises to engage staff in learning and what we can learn from each other and from the community. As I said, I'd be happy to send what I've written as a plan for my board. It's not terribly long, it's just a few pages, but it provides an outline of what of a lot of things I want to concentrate on and how I want to use the Harwood tools to get us there.
Thank you. No, it's good.
This is Margaret at Yale Board and Library. David, can I ask, how were you training your staff in what you learned? I think I'm having a hard time boiling down all this information into the chunks of time that people have available. So what did those kind of staff sharing sessions look like for you?
Well, it's slow, and I'm purposely doing it slow so that there is some understanding that goes on, so that I'm not scaring people too much about what I want to do and how the direction that I want us to go. So, for instance, I started conversations with my senior management team. We went through some of the exercises together. introduced some of the documentation that I brought back, talked about how I want to use these tools, not only to gain public knowledge, but for staff learning. In December, we had a staff institute. All staff were there. We spent the day talking about the learning organization, and I found a way to introduce some of these tools and practices into that discussion as well. I have been going to individual department meetings. I haven't done all of them yet, but have started those, and am taking that opportunity, 30, 45 minutes, to go through some of the ask exercises, aspirations exercise, again to introduce the idea to staff and to answer questions about how you can use those. And I understand this may be a little easier for me than for some of the rest of you. You know, frankly, when you're the director, you get to do a lot of things just because you want to do them, and I know that may not be the case for everybody. So I know it might be a little easier for me to kind of introduce and do these things, but I'm doing it slowly and just kind of bringing people along to the concepts and the ideas.
So I'd like to point out a couple things that I think are real important just for people to keep in your mind. He talked about taking it slow, and quite often what we find is people come back and all of a sudden it's kind of like, how do we convert an entire organization? And think a little bit about what we talked at in the lab in terms of Pebble theory of change. The idea of finding a place where you can use one of the tools, you can start talking about how your organization can use these tools, give people a sense of possibility for where they might fit. And it's often best spread and adapted in an organization by just what he's talking about, which is taking it slow, actually using the tools, helping people to see how they could be used, leveraging the idea that there's different possibilities. And over time, what you'll end up finding out is the practice spreads. So, I mean, his notions of taking it slow, actually using it, getting started, sharing them with people, getting them to have the experience is a spot on. Other people, what other ideas, things have people been doing? What experiences have you had? What questions have been raised?
This is Susan from Skokie.
Mm-hmm.
We are in the midst of a major realignment here at the library, and we have created a community engagement department. We're going to be having our first department meeting on Monday, this coming Monday. Mm-hmm. And so my thinking at this point, we're going to be doing the aspirations exercise and using that as a kickoff as we start to work on our department mission statement. And then in the next few months, we're going to have to be developing our goals and objectives for the coming year. Mm-hmm. So I'm seeing the aspiration exercise both as foundational for that process, but then also for people to experience it. And we're beginning to talk about, in their various outreach responsibilities, starting to identify some potential groups where we could sort of naturally have community conversations as a place to start.
Mm-hmm. Any ideas that prompts for people? Any questions you have?
I guess I have a question. This is Renee from Evanston. we're going to be presenting to our library board next month on Harwood, and we were just wondering if anyone else has presented to their board or to their trustees, and if they just like overall talked about Harwood, or if they actually did like the aspiration exercise or one of the other exercises with them.
This is David at the Oak Park Library. I did, and I did both. I mean, I've been talking with them over the last few months about my learnings at the Harwood Institute, and in December I took a short period of time to go through one of the exercises with them so that they could get a better understanding of what I was talking about. I think it's still going to take some time and perhaps some additional work with them to make sure that they have a real understanding of what the possibilities are. But to introduce it to them over the last few months, I've done both of what you've asked.
This is Connie from Evanston. Would you mind telling us what exercise you did? Because the aspirations exercise seems like it would take too long. I don't think the board would be able to afford as much time.
Well, that is basically what I did, but I sort of abbreviated it a bit. I told them that they were really just getting a taste of it. It wasn't the complete exercise. We didn't take as much time with it as you normally would. But then again, I really just wanted them to get a taste of it and let them know that we'll come back and revisit that again and again. So I did that, but I didn't spend as much time with it as I would in a conversation with staff or community members.
David, this is David. What did you shorten up?
Well, I mean, I just didn't let the conversations go on very long. I mean, I went through the questions, but and I quickly got some responses from the trustees, and they could see what the direction that a conversation would go, and that's all I really wanted to accomplish in that first sort of test exercise with them.
Thank you. We're going to be doing this is David again. We are going to be doing presenting at kind of mini conferences this spring, and there's at least a couple, 3 sessions that we're going to do 50-minute, hour-long versions of this, and I was curious how you were able to roll it out.
So let me chime in on just a couple things. I might put Kathleen, you're still on the call here, right?
I certainly am.
So I'm thinking, would you mind me putting you on the spot and talking a little bit? ALA has been embedding Harwood's practices over the last couple years, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you've seen that work in terms of helping a board to understand what it is you're doing and what these practices are. How did you go about it, and what does it look like from your perspective? Because you've been seeing this unpack at ALA over the last couple of years.
Mary Davis Fournier, if Mary is still on the line, she can correct me where I'm going wrong as I share my impressions of this. I think we talked about this in our lab in October, that a number of what we were calling kitchen table conversations were conducted at the annual conference, and from those wonderful discussions about their aspirations for ALA, we came up with lots of really interesting data about what members were looking for. And then Mary Geekus, our Associate Executive Director of ALA, pulled it all together and summarized that, in essence, what people are looking for, their aspirations, is for ALA to be a more welcoming and less confusing organization. And I think many of us who have been involved in ALA could respond to that very quickly. And then what we're going to be doing for those of you who are going to be in Philadelphia, I hope you'll be able to stop by one of these. We're continuing the conversations with a slightly different focus. And the focus in Philadelphia at these kitchen table conversations will be on what are your aspirations for ALA conferences? We want to focus in on the conference event. We know from surveys that we've done after our annual conference that there are some things that we hear repeatedly. One of them being there are so many wonderful programs, but they're all at the same time, and it's impossible to go to all of them, and a number of different other comments. So we're hoping at Midwinter to focus in on that. And then in terms of the innovation spaces, one of the things I can tell you coming out of the discussion at annual conference, Keith Michael Fields, our director, met with a number of staff members about 3 or 4 weeks ago to talk about those results, to see what suggestions we had, to find out what we can do to actually make ALA more welcoming and less confusing. So we're starting in on that work. And Mary, have I missed anything from your perspective?
No, I think that was actually an excellent summary. Thanks, Kathleen.
Oh, okay. But let me put you both on. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say one last thing in terms of going forward. ALA is we'll be working on our strategic plan soon, starting on not our 2015 plan, but our 2020 plan. And much of the data that will feed into that planning process is going to be coming from these discussions. We're going to continue holding them at Midwinter and annual. We're hoping whenever it's possible to see if at our state chapter association meetings, if it's possible to have these discussions, again, to focus in those situations on their aspirations for the future, not just of ALA, but of their profession and of the libraries where they're working. So it'll help us get a sense of one of our goals is transforming libraries, and are we working on things that are really going to help make that happen? So that's it.
So, but let me ask you to try to put that in the context to help these people in terms of how does that get the boards more engaged? How have you gone about getting ALA board members to understand what it is you're doing, why it's important, how you're using it? It's not just what it is, but, you know.
Yeah, exactly. One of the advantages we have that maybe the rest of my colleagues on the phone don't necessarily have is that the board has bought into this process wholeheartedly. Maureen Sullivan, our immediate past president, was very instrumental in getting this going. So what happened at the fall board meeting is there was a really good discussion with the board about this whole process, about, again, what we learned at annual conference, how we want to move forward with this. So in some respects, we're somewhat unique in that we already had board buy-in right from the get-go.
So there's a couple things here that I would just like to point out for people. They talk about actually sharing what they're learning with the board. If you're out doing aspirations conversations and you're learning something from those conversations, it becomes really key to come back and share what you're learning with other people so they can begin to see why it's important what you're learning. A trap that sometimes people fall into is they'll do the aspirations exercises, they'll do the ask exercises, they'll have a really interesting experience, but they may not share any of it with anybody. And you can tend to get traction when you actually share the information with people, because as you've experienced already, what you learn in these conversations is a different kind of knowledge than you normally have. The other thing that I've seen unfold in ALA is they didn't necessarily get all the board members trained in Harwood right away, but a few people got trained in Harwood practices. And I've seen it play out quite often that sometimes approaching a board and trying to get everybody on board may be a big lift, but you can also invite board members that are willing to do so to participate in some of these things and see and experience them for themselves, what these conversations look like and what you learn from it. And then the real key is what ALA is doing is they're actually taking what they learn and they're talking about how can what we learn allow us to move forward and actually take action on it. So the actions we're taking reflects what we're hearing people say to us. So does that make sense? Does that help in terms of how you think about how you might engage from board members?
I think the one about sharing what you learn is probably the most important one.
Yeah, the experience that I've had is trying to get people in a conversation so they can experience it. Harwood is quite often difficult to describe, but the experience typically resonates. So if you can get people in a conversation and then you can share what you're learning from those conversations and begin to take action on those things, it tends to gain traction. And it gains traction, you're going to have more things to share what you've learned and what you're doing as a result of it. And at that point, it really starts to take hold and people understand what this is about. Other thoughts or ideas people have? Questions? Things that you've been doing?
I have a question. This is David Lee in Evanston. Is there any update on getting any materials in Spanish?
Well, it just so let me put it this way: there's an opportunity that's being pursued. It's not specific and haven't necessarily landed on it specifically yet, but there's an opportunity that surfaces being pursued. So I don't have a specific yes or no to that yet, but let me just say I'm hopeful.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Other
questions people have? Things to share? Yeah.
Oh, sorry. This is Mandy at State Library. Evan and I just this week did the aspirations exercise with our executive team, which is the head of fiscal, the state librarian, both associate state librarians, head of HR, all of our bigwigs. And it was really, I think they got a lot out of it. I felt I got a lot out of it. And what was really exciting to us is we've only done 2 of the aspiration exercises, but we already between the 2, we're seeing a lot of similarities and connections.
So, and let me ask you, what are you doing with that?
We have an innovation space set up, and so we're going to share our findings with the people in that group. And then we also talked a bit about, because, we serve both other libraries and state employees, having some people watch the Community Conversations webinar and try out the aspirations exercise with different state agencies. And that will probably come from our innovation space, although we haven't formally decided that yet.
So I'm going to be clear, I heard that right. You're thinking of using the aspiration exercise with the state agency?
Yeah, or we're still deciding, or probably more of a community conversation. Although it's hard to sometimes get into the schedules of these, bureaucratic organizations.
Right. So Carlton, this is Evan. So what we're doing is our thinking is by inviting the consultant on staff who works directly with state agencies. Her name is Judith, and we're going to invite her to come to the webinar with us because she already has kind of an entree into those state agencies, knows some of their bureaucratic levels, knows who to reach out to get things done. So we're hoping that she can start working to have some of those conversations with the state agencies if that's the way that we want to take things.
Mm-hmm. So this is a really excellent point that I'd like other people to take note of. If there's people that you think can help you in terms of engaging the community, having these conversations, invite them to the webinar. They're welcome to attend and sit in and participate in it. So you might be thinking about who can help you get this done, what you want to get done, and have them join that time. And for what it's worth, if you have additional people that you're working with that you want to bring in and join these calls, you can do that as well. The only caveat is the call's really for about shared learning of what people are doing. If there's something really specific about your library you want to talk about, we can take that offline and talk about it. Anybody else?
Sorry, this is Mandy from Ohio again. We're also going to do this aspirations exercise with a number of other groups. We have a managers, which is like the department heads in our organization. We also have it planned for the board. And we had, I think, a similar issue to what a couple people mentioned. We have to wait until we have a board retreat because our board meetings are already really jammed, and they're coming from all across the state to come to these, so they also have to leave at a certain time. So we're waiting to like a longer retreat to do that. And we're also, we've had interest expressed from the consortium that we run has an advisory group, and the head of the consortium was at the executive team meeting, and she also expressed interest in having us do this aspirations exercise with them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's some of, and we're going to take that knowledge again back to our innovation team to think about, to kind of process it, I guess.
Yeah. So one of the things I might point out, just for this is wonderful. One of the things I might point out here is you're having lots of aspirations exercises with different people. You're talking about at a board retreat with the consortium, with managers, with, I think you said, all the big wigs. And one of the things that you might do in the innovation space is pull out what you have from those aspirations exercises and look, what are the cross-cutting themes? What are the things that recur over and over and over again? And by definition, those are starting to be themes. And you might then think about who is it that needs to know these things that are coming up that are being repeated over and over again. It's kind of like Kathleen shared from AOA's perspective. People want the things less confusing. And they talk about meetings at conferences, lots of good stuff happening, but they're all happening at the same time. Think about, from all these aspirations exercises, what are the themes and who else needs to know, and then who needs to know that it actually can take action on some of the things that are surfacing. So you'll need to be able to share that knowledge with individuals that can do something about it.
Absolutely. We just invited the head of our agency, the state librarian, to our innovation space so that she can be there as we synthesize this information.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Yeah. Other ideas or thoughts or things people have been doing want to share? No? Any questions people have?
I guess a question I have that still remains, or like David, you mentioned you were doing some things with your board. Is there any like technique or I guess method that you would suggest for dealing with that one board member or one person who's a bit of a negative Nancy?
Well, yeah, well, I will acknowledge that I have one or two of those. And in fact, during the conversation that I took them through, the brief one back in December, there was one who expressed some reservations about the usefulness of the tool. But again, I talked about the time that it takes to generate the kind of trust that's needed to go through the exercise successfully and to gain the kind of public knowledge that you need. And I think enough of the other trustees were understanding what the possibilities of the methodologies were that they helped to sort of answer some of the concerns. I don't think the concerns have gone away completely, but again, I think for me the key is to just be kind of very slow and gentle with it, and it's better to take some time and demonstrate what you can do, I think, with the tools in order to convince people who may need a little more convincing. Again, I haven't gotten that far with all of this yet. A lot of the conversations that I'm planning to have are now just scheduled, but I think you just have to be a little patient, I guess.
Thanks.
Anybody else have any ideas on the topic of what to do with a negative voice in the room? Anybody else encountered that? I know you have.
Well, this is Meg, and I think it's just in terms of it, being perceived as flavor of the month. But I think, Mandy, your idea of, cascading it through so many different pieces and then kind of aggregating and sharing that's a really great way to go. We're going to have an internal conversation. It was scheduled during the vortex when, we were closed that day, so we've rescheduled the meeting. But I'm really anxious to, just kind of get it going.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Really, one of the things I'd like to point to is, like in Skokie, where they're talking about doing the aspirations exercise in the context of setting up a community engagement department, and then having some conversation about the groups and the communities they can engage with. And then the story that Mandy shared about it cascading through. I was on a call yesterday with the people from Saratoga in New York, and they had done aspirations exercises with all of the departments in their library to give them a sense of what these conversations were about. And, these ideas of just getting started, thinking about where else you can provide that experience, but really critically important is taking track of what you learn, trying to identify themes, and then sharing those themes with people that can take action on them. Ask yourself the question, who else needs to know this? And who needs to take action on these things? And that's a very good entryway point to this. It's just get started, think about implications, sharing the information, and then actually doing something with it. And that typically, I would tell you that my experience is that if you're looking for 100% buy-in, you're probably going to be disappointed. But if you're looking for something spreading and more people, it resonating with more people over time and growing a new narrative in your organization around authentic engagement and how it can be used, I've never seen it not work.
This is Carolyn from Skokie. I think a lot of us have gravitated to the aspirations exercise because it is so rich in terms of the responses that you get. and yet it does take more time, as some of us have acknowledged. And I wondered if anybody had tried using the turn outward exercise as something that's kind of simpler and quicker to do with people, and maybe a first step to just get people to understand the difference between being inwardly focused and outwardly focused. Has anybody tried that, and with what kind of results?
Anybody use the turn outward exercise instead of aspirations? No?
Yeah, this is David Oak Park. Yes, I did use that also with my management team and with some other staff in department meetings. I haven't done that with the board, but I did use it again just as a way to introduce in a more general way some of the tools and concepts.
And how did that go for you? How did you find using that with people?
It would seem to be a little, it didn't generate a whole lot of conversation at first. People were a little, well, first of all, they were almost hesitant to pick one or the other in the column because they weren't exactly sure. They spent a lot of time in their heads trying to define some of the meanings of some of the terms. So it was a little hard going, but you know, after we talked about it for a little bit, people did come up with some good insights from it.
Mm-hmm. Did it end up giving people a better sense of those concepts and what they mean and the significance of them?
For some, I think so. Again, you know, I've only done it a couple of times, and you know, we didn't spend a great deal of time getting into it that deeply. But in the end, some of them, from the comments anyway, I could tell that some in the groups were understanding some of those concepts in a little bit more of a meaningful way.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else have experience using those as a tool of getting people engaged? So if you think back to the lab in October, oh, go ahead. Will you say something?
Yeah, Carlton, this is Randy at MCLS. I was asked to help facilitate a session that the State Library was running for one of their directors' workshops, and we did the turn exercise with them. There were 60 people, maybe 50 or 60 people in the room, and they were at tables, rounds of 8. And so they basically just sat together at their table and went through the exercise. And the experience there was, you know, there's a lot of confusion about what some of the terms mean. So there's lots of asking for definitions. What does this mean? What does that mean? But it also, those kinds of questions gave a good opportunity for discussion by sort of turning the question back and asking them, what do you think it means? And how are those two terms different? And how would they lead to different outcomes? So that's one comment. And another, my sort of overall experience with that particular group was that it is difficult to move them to what you just called authentic engagement as opposed to community outreach activities. You know, I think as librarians, we are very much in the mindset of thinking that our outreach activities, you know, going to all those visiting with those various groups in the community and so on and so forth, is community engagement, when what we're talking about is something at a very different and very much deeper level. So that is, I think that the turn outward exercise is a very first step to really getting into what do we mean
when in our context, in the Harwood context, by community engagement.
Mm-hmm. Other ideas that sparks for anybody? Thoughts? So let me just offer, in the lab in October, I wasn't in your room when you did the turn quiz. I was in with the other group, but quite often the notion of the terms are confusing and can you define them for me comes up. That's more common than not.
Right.
And as Randy pointed out, the richness of this is having the group define those terms for themselves and talk about why they define the terms in the way they do. And in that conversation, people end up having a different kind of an understanding of what those terms mean and how it relates to the kind of difference between community outreach as we traditionally defined it and authentic engagement and what that means. And so, I mean, that particular experience in a turn quiz of having people say define the terms is not unusual, but flip it back and have people do it for them. And what you get out of what you would really get out of a turn quiz application is the people to have an understanding of what the term turn outward means. And as you know, that turn outward term comes up all the time in Harwood's context. And that's one entry point, and it's a little briefer than an aspirations exercise. So I mean, think about the turn quiz as a tool that you can be used for a strategic purpose. If you think, for example, you're working with a group where you just want to have some reorientation of the way they think about how they go about their work, a turn quiz might be a good way to get people to sort of help reorient their thinking. An aspirations exercise, you may have a sense that there's a group that you want to really get aligned, that you're maybe forming together for the first time. You're trying to get a shared sense of purpose. Or maybe it's a group whose sense of purpose has been lost. You can use an aspirations exercise to gain alignment and help people sort of get on the same page so they're going in the same direction and understanding why. So it's a little bit of a different strategic purpose you can use it for. It's also a tool that might be a little bit more accessible for some people as an entry point into these kinds of conversations. The community conversation that we're going to be doing next week on the webinar takes even longer. It's about an hour and a half. And quite honestly, I seldom see them take place where they don't go longer. And the reason they go longer is because typically the participants really get into the conversation and they don't want to stop. I've more often than not seen them go for 2 hours. But those conversations are also going to get you a lot more tangible knowledge that you can use, that you can theme, that you can come back with and use for making really strategic different choices about programs and services and how you're going to take action relative to strategic plans and action plans. You're going to get more concrete information out of the community conversation. So I would encourage you to think about these as like different tools with different strategic purposes and start to think about looking at the situation you're facing with a little bit of a diagnostic lens and thinking which tool is going to work here. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also, they weave together and there's a whole. And I would not want to not move back and encourage people to remember the 3 A's, because the 3 A's is also a tool. On the call I had yesterday with the other cohort, there was one library that was talking about that they didn't start with aspirations or turn quiz. They started with the 3 A's exercise. And you know, the 3 A's exercise, that was in Pittsburgh. They did some self-assessments of the work they were doing with school librarians and university librarians and public librarians. And they used the 3 A's as a way really of trying to create a different kind of norm for the way this multi-type group they had was working together. So there's a strategic purpose to the 3 A's as well. Other ideas or thoughts people have, other experiences, things that you want to share? So, you know, we have an hour and a half. We don't have to take it. This is your time. So I don't want to cut it short if you have something else to say, but I don't want to keep you on the phone because I know you have lots to do. So anybody have thoughts or insights or questions that have surfaced? I'll take that as a no. Well, let me make a suggestion. Let me make a suggestion to you. We're going to be doing the webinar on hosting community conversations. Community conversations are typically 8 to 15 people. They can be a little less. They can be a little more. They take a little bit longer. So one of the things you might be thinking about, and it's not premature to think about, is who are you going to invite to a community conversation to be able to get it started in a conversation that's going to have about 10 questions, probably going to take an hour and a half. It's, you know, where's your opportunity to get a group together to get started? Because the first thing that you're going to learn in this is the community conversation, you get better with it with repetitions. It's really not that hard, but quite often people think, you know, I want to start in a safe space. And by that, they mean I want to start with people that I'm comfortable with instead of just a whole group of people I don't know. Sometimes people are brave and they go out and they'll do it with people they don't know, and frankly, that works. People don't need to be scared. But you might be thinking about where can I schedule an hour and a half with 8 to 15 people together to do one of these longer, deeper conversations. Because out of the webinar, what we're going to be encouraging you to do is to actually do it. And then when we come back and have our next call, we'll start talking about what's your experience doing community conversations, what do you learn, how are you applying that to what you're doing, and bringing it back into an innovation space. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's something to be sort of noodling about. Where can you get started with those? So if there's not anything else, just one housekeeping thing. I would appreciate somebody from Evanston staying on the line because I have a quick question. There's an email that keeps bouncing back at me, and I would like to get it cleared up.
Okay.
So maybe if somebody from Evanston could stick on for just a minute and I can get that point cleared up.
All right.
So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Carlton. Thank you.
So I'm not sure who from Evanston stayed on.
We're all here.
Oh, you're all here. Okay.
Yeah.
So I have an email address for, let me find it here just real quick. Oh, shoot, I've got it in the wrong spot. Just a second. It's, I've got to open up something real quick. Sorry. Just a second here. I think it's Rick Kinnebrew.
Yeah.
I have an att.net address, and it kept bouncing back at me. And maybe I have the wrong email address for him.
Carlton,
Yeah.
his library address would be T as in Tom, Kennebrew at cityofelvanston.org.
So T and his last name
Right.
at City of Evanston. Did you say .org? Or
Yeah.
no?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So what you might tell him is I'm going to shoot him just a test to make sure at least our emails are connecting.
Okay.
All right?
Okay, thank you.
Good. Yeah. How's things going there?
Okay.
We have to move out of this room. We had something come up, so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we gotta go. Someone else has our room reserved. Sorry.
Okay. We'll talk to you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.